2015, an elite DFS Army Commando unit formed to bring high-level DFS strategy to the masses. Today, hated by DFS sharks and lineup sellers alike, they continue their quest to turn Joe into DFS pros.
Fast 40. This week we're headed to Dover for the AAA 400 Drive for Autism. As always, Tacos Fast 40 is brought to you by DFSArmy.com, the best DFS Army site on the planet. And if you like what you hear on this podcast and would like to check out our premium content for every sport, not just NASCAR, we've got great golf, baseball, and NBA content, and of course we've got NFL coming back. We just had the draft, getting ready for that. Got some season-long content coming out. It's all excellent. Check us out at dfsarmy.com. Use promo code TACO for a lifetime 10% off. It supports the pod. So we're headed to Dover for the AAA 400 Drive for Autism. Dover is one of the more unique tracks on the circuit. The surface of the racetrack is concrete, and it is a 1 mile monster mile, as you may often hear it being referred to. And the track actually has a mascot, a giant rock monster called Miles. And the surface of the track is very, very unique. It's hard to compare it to any other track. It's very up and down, sort of reminds you of a roller coaster. Drivers will often say it's the roller coaster of NASCAR, because you're going up and down and all around. The straightaways are very banked and it's kind of tight, so some of these crashes can be quite devastating and involve a lot of people, but sometimes that's not the case, and sometimes you have quite a tidy race here. It's kind of back and forth. People will lead a lot of laps, and we usually see multi-domination. Last time here we had, I think, 3 or 4 different people that led over 50 laps. There are 400 laps, as this is it's the AAA 400, and it's exactly 1 mile long. Makes a lot of sense there. And practice times will matter a bit. Since the track is concrete, it doesn't change nearly as much as asphalt does. Based on the time that you practice. So I know in weeks past, we've had funky qualifying and night races and things like that, where the morning practices won't really matter when you're looking at the race, if it's going to be raced in the afternoon, or like Bristol, when Bristol kept getting pushed around or whatever. Dover is just fully concrete, and despite that, the track does change. It doesn't get better like a lot of other tracks. What happens really is the track gets even shittier than it begins. Once rubber is put down, the track just gets kind of nasty, and players just gonna have to deal with it. It's one of those tricky tracks like Pocono or Kentucky, where they're going to be struggling around with it a little bit, and it's very, very tricky exiting the corner. When I was in Charlotte for the Wells Fargo Championship this week, I took a stop at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Great place to be, obviously, if you're going to go to Charlotte, and ran the simulator there for a little while. Me and my girlfriend took a few shots at Dover, and let me tell you, exiting the corner, it's just not like other tracks. You're going to lose the end around, and even talking with some of the people there that have done it a lot, they all say, yeah, you got to kind of let up on the accelerator when you're exiting the corner, especially because it's so tricky when you're going up over that little bump onto the banked straightaway. It's very, very tricky track, and it's shaped like your standard oval, but for a track as small as it is, the banking does get pretty high. The banking is 24 degrees on the turns, and if you compare that to the other 1 mile long tracks, there's just no real comparison here. New Hampshire and Phoenix have bankings of 7 and 9 degrees, so you really can't look to those. It definitely correlates the closest with Darlington, although the race doesn't really play out the same way as Darlington usually. Darlington's very much about the pole sitter, as where the pole sitter here at Dover, they'll average 68 lead laps. At Darlington, they'll average 147 lead laps. And the average green flag run here at Dover is actually the longest of any track on the NASCAR circuit. 51 laps of green flag on average, and that's just because it really is just a clean and tidy track. But man, when the crashes come, they come big. So it's really a hit or miss. You could have a very clean race where the top 15 drivers will just they'll put up all of the fantasy points and rack up all of the dominator points. And sometimes you'll get, like a few years back when Jimmy Johnson had that problem on a restart that wiped out half the field. You'll see that happen. It's a track that kind of is boom or bust when it comes to that. When looking at the positional scoring summary on the research station, this is one of the most powerful tools that we have. We can see that fantasy scoring almost directly correlates with starting position. Drivers starting in the first 5 positions average 42 fantasy points. The next 5 grouping after that, 33. 11 through 15th, 37 fantasy points. 16 through 20th, 38 fantasy points. And this would be on DraftKings. We'll talk about FanDuel in a little bit here. The thing here is, though, just if you're starting 31st or worst, you're averaging about 15 fantasy points per race. And guys starting in the back half of not the back half, but the bottom 5 of the field, 36th through 40th, only 6% of the guys starting 36th or worse have posted 30 fantasy points or more. It's very, very, very hard for the scrubs in the back. And if you're looking at the DNF rates that we have, which are percentage of the time that a guy finishes within 5 laps of the lead lap, guys starting 31st and worse have a 75% DNF rate, and I'm not kidding about that. If you're starting below 36, you have an 80% DNF rate, with that being just coming within 5 laps of the lead. People go down laps here, and they go down laps fast and furiously. When just looking at the pole sitter, now the pole sitter averages 56 fantasy points, 68.3 lead laps, 35.1 fast laps, and so far we haven't had a pole sitter post a DNF yet, but it certainly can happen. There's one spot in particular which is quite head scratching to me, honestly. It's the 16th through 20th starting position. Of all of the slots, they average the second most fantasy points, 38.1 fantasy points. They average the most laps finished, and they also average the lowest DNF percentage of only 10%. 54% of drivers starting in the 16th through 20th starting positions score 40 points or more as far as fantasy points go. But when you're looking at the high upside here, only 8% of the time have they scored 60 fantasy points, as where drivers starting 1st through 5th, 30% of the time they hit that 60 fantasy point mark, and 26% of the time they hit the 70 fantasy point mark. Just looking at the overall top scores on DraftKings, a few years ago we had Kevin Harvick lead 355 laps with 135 fast laps here. Yes, 200 fantasy points is on the menu here at Dover. That can absolutely happen. He did not start off the pole for this whole thing. He started 15th, but man, you can absolutely rack up the lead laps here. We've had, over the last 10 races, 5 times where drivers have led over 200 laps. And if you look at the numbers for over 100 laps, we have a total of 15 drivers in the last 10 races who have led over 100 laps. Dominator points are absolutely essential here. I know there are 100 less laps than we have at Martinsville and Bristol, but since this is generally a much, much cleaner race, barring the odd odd incident where, a bunch of people crash, which really doesn't happen all that often. This is a very predictable race. The top 15 will do pretty much as good here as they will. Well, I guess I should say the top 20. The top 20 drivers do just considerably better than the bottom 20. And it's just not close, really. Fantasy scoring, just after the 25th starting position, there's just a humongous drop-off. And the guys in the back, you just cannot be taking them this week. There's one guy I'm looking at down there, but for the most part, unlike the weeks before at tracks like, of course, Talladega and Bristol, Richmond, these places where historically the guys from the back have scored decently, that is just not the case when you're looking at the statistics this week. There's just no. And there isn't a humongous advantage to the pole sitter. We see lead changes fairly often compared to other tracks. And practice times also come into play a little bit here, although I wouldn't really consider practice 1 all that much because they were definitely in qualifying trim. But for practice 3, we've got some really nice numbers, some 15 and 20 lap numbers to go, as well as the 10 lap speeds and just the overall quickness from the guys. You don't need a whole lot of laps to know how fast your car is in practice. You really don't need to run these crazy long runs, but fortunately for us, a lot of drivers did and were able to look at that and see who's good in the longer runs here. One thing we do know about this track is that tire wear off is very slow. Speeds don't really drop off a whole lot, and that compared to some of the tracks we've been at, like Richmond, Bristol, and like Fontana especially. Tracks like that where we've had insane tire fall off, that's just not going to be the case this week. And qualifying really did an interesting number here. We've got basically all the best drivers in NASCAR qualifying in the front. You're going to need to do your research this week, and I'm here to help you with that. So let's go down this field here. Just going to go by DraftKings salary, and only going to focus on DraftKings for now. At the end of the podcast, I will go over FanDuel and FanDuel strategy because it is a completely different ballgame over there. But for DraftKings now, let's just run through this real quick. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over each driver like I usually would. Kind of in a crunch for time here. I mean, I just got home from vacation. I'm ready to chill here, ready to hit the hay a little bit, hopefully. 1 a.m. here where I'm at right now. The pod's coming late, but been a busy guy. Been traveling. You're lucky you're getting this podcast. We haven't had one in a minute just due to all these Saturday races, Saturday qualifying, Xfinity, and all this, me being sick. But let's get it together right here. Let's start with the odds-on favorite, 4.5 to 1. Well, I guess it'd be a plus 450 favorite here. Kyle Busch, $11,600 on DraftKings, driving that number 18 Toyota. Last week at the plate races, the only race anytime recently we haven't seen him finish either first or second. Like, he's been a staple in the top 3 all season, and he's starting 4th, starting right behind the likes of Harvick, Truex Jr., and Larson. I mean, you've got a star-studded field up front, which is great because you really aren't going to tie as much this week. Paying for Kyle Busch is going to suck because you can't punt. So I know that Kyle Busch has had some crazy ownership, but man, this might be the week where, like we saw with Harvick earlier in the season with his expensive price tag, man, Kyle Busch is just so hard to afford with the lack of these studs down low. But I still love taking some Kyle Busch. He's the defending champion here, runner-up in 2016 and in 2015. Although he does seem to do a lot better in the fall race than in the spring race. His last 4 spring races, 16th, 30th, 36th, 42nd. But you can't predict DNFs like that, and I know that seems like quite the trend that we've got going on there. The 2013 spring race, he did finish 4th there, and I have no problem using Kyle Busch whatsoever. I don't know that he's going to be really all that unpopular. His 10 lap speeds, he was runner-up in both of the final 2 practices that we're looking at here, so that's a very good sign. And his car's just in a really nice spot. His team's in a really nice spot. Some of the numbers that they showed for the pit stop times, JGR is number 1 at pit stop speeds. I mean, they've just got a clear cut advantage right now, especially over Furniture Row. Truex has been struggling with that a little bit. Really hard to not use some Kyle Busch here. It's just that salary. If you want to make the fade completely, that's fine. But if you want to play him a whole bunch, feel free to. I mean, starting fourth, and with that price tag, his ownership won't be insane, and he's just been consistently, no matter what, finding his way up in the front, always finishing top three, and always finding a way to lead laps. And his teammate Denny Hamlin also has just been able to sneak out there and lead some laps. It seems like the JGR and Stewart Haas racing show so far this season. And speaking of Stewart Haas racing, you've got the king of Stewart Haas racing, Kevin Harvick, $11,000. He's starting runner-up on the pole, right next to Kyle Larson there, who is on the pole. But you could almost consider Harvick the real favorite to lead some laps here. He's averaging 81 laps led per race, and I know that a lot of that was thrown off with his ridiculous 300-plus lead lap performance, but man, oh man, if you're just looking at this year alone, also get rid of the 2 plate races we've played at so far, he's also averaging 75 lead laps and 50 fast laps. Here he averages 44 fast laps. I mean, the numbers are just all there for him. Looking at his long run speeds, he led the entire field in 20 lap averages. The guy is a beast. He's always been a beast. He's always been pretty much the best driver. The last couple of years, he's had some problems in the pits. He's at least formidable there now, and he is just crushing it. Maybe not so much the last few weeks as Kyle Busch has really come into form, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking Harvick. He's definitely going to be one of these top dominator potential studs for sure. Martin Truex Jr., starting in the third position, $10,800 on DraftKings. His problem has been in the pits recently, and it has shown. He's kind of struggling a little bit this year compared to last year. And I know we focus more on Truex at these 1.5 mile tracks, but this is a track that he has had tons of success at. It's in the Dover area, and that's pretty close to his hometown of Jersey. He's finished top 10, or top 11, I'll say, in each of the last 8 races here, including a win in the 2016 fall race. He was on the pole last year and led 50 laps for an alright 4th place finish. Pretty good results there. And his ownership has been a little bit lower, and I think that's going to certainly be the case with Keselowski starting a little bit farther back, Kyle Larson on the pole, and of course Harvick being popular and Kyle Busch being super popular every week. Truex, I don't know about his ownership this week. We might see him in the 20s, and that's an excellent spot for him when he has almost as good of odds as anybody else here to lead some laps. There's no real clear-cut dominator like we've seen in some of these previous weeks where you've had some super scrubs finish or start second and third. Well, I wouldn't say super scrubs, but guys like Kurt Busch, even though they have been leading a little, you've got the best of the best up here, and Truex is kind of in a little bit of a sneaky spot here, and this is a track that he's very good at. But most people, when they think of guy that's good at Dover, they don't think of Truex. They think of Jimmy Johnson, but we'll get to that guy in a second. Truex, I like the play. He's just going to be yet another one of these sort of pivot GPP dominators, and you don't want 0% of him. That is absolutely for sure. Brad Keselowski, $10,400. Penske could not have looked any better last week. Of course, they just dominate the plate races. Going into this week, he lit up second practice, number 1 in the 10-lap speeds, runner-up only to his teammate Logano in overall speed, and in the final practice, took a bunch of laps, but his long-run speed kind of escaped him a little bit. 8th in the 20-lap averages, 9th in the 10-lap averages, nowhere as good as the second practice. If we would have only had 2 practices this week again, Keselowski would have got a lot of love. The third practice just wasn't exactly there for them, but still got a lot of potential upside with Keselowski here. He hasn't won here recently. He's had some runner-up finishes. Crashed at this race last year, but we can definitely look past that. And he's definitely a top 10, definitely a top 10 kind of guy here, and certainly someone that can lead some laps. he's definitely been better at the shorter tracks than he has the 1.5s and the larger tracks so far this year. I know we haven't hit the Poconos and the Michigan, the 2-mile tracks. It'll be interesting to see how he does there, but he did say that his short track package is in a pretty good spot right now. The issue I have here is the odd makers seem to not like him at all here. 16-1 compared to Truex at 7-1, Harvick 6-1, Kyle Busch 4.5-1. But he does start a little bit farther back and it's just a little tiny bit safer than all of these other studs here, and he could definitely put his nose in there. Kyle Larson 6.5-1 here, and he's $10,200 starting on the pole. I would love Kyle Larson on the pole if it wasn't for the fact that the 3 guys behind him are the 3 best drivers in NASCAR. That kind of sucks a lot. Now, this is one of his best tracks, easily. Runner-up here in this exact race last year, and also in this race in 2016. Runner-up in 2015, the spring race. Finished 3rd. I mean, he's a beast. Averages 57.9 lead laps at this track. This is one of his best tracks. He's great at these extra high bank, steep, difficult courses. Tracks. Sorry, I've got so much golf on the mind. Still just beaming from the Wells Fargo in Quail Hollow. But, and speak of the devil, quick story. Saw Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin there. Got to meet Denny Hamlin. Maybe I should talk about a little more as those are the next 2 guys on the slate here. But Larson, I saw him tee off. Had some pretty good form. Hamlin did end up getting the better of him. I met Denny Hamlin. Great guy, of course. And he made sure to brag to me that he beat Kyle Larson in golf. And you know what? If it comes down to Hamlin and Larson at the end, I could see him getting a little bit of revenge here in what matters. I mean, that's just more of a joke for me than anything there. But no bad blood there, obviously. It was a good time. And, hope those guys had a lot of fun, got their minds, got to relax, chill, play some golf. I wouldn't think anything more into it there. I really like Larson here, and I think he's going to be popular just because he's got that the first pit stop. Sitting on the pole, he chooses his lane. Should be able to at least lead a good chunk of laps off of the initial stage 1 and potentially stick around towards the end. We've just definitely seen him using up his tires early. And that's just something that's not going to happen here as much as other tracks. That's kind of what's bit him in the ass lately, is that he's using up his tires, and then towards the end of a run, he's falling back. Now, even though this track is one with very long green runs, we do see the tire fall off just not really matter a whole lot. Speeds stay pretty consistent lap to lap. Denny Hamlin, of course, Mr. Good at Golf himself, $9,900. And like I mentioned earlier, he just likes to sneak into the lead. Almost every race, he's found himself up there at some point. One of these races, he's going to just dominate a large chunk again. Now, he's starting in 10th, and I think he's going to be very sneaky here. In the 3 practices, he ranks 17th, 22nd, and 17th, so the speed just ain't really there like his teammates. And he only took a 15-lap run at the longest, and that was 6th overall. Not shabby, but could be better. Excuse me, I got the hiccups here. I'm trying to push through this. 35th last year at this race. He obviously had a bit of a wreck there, but usually he's finishing around top 10. No real high finishes. 5th is his best finish in the last 10 years here. So track history, not all that great. Just in GPP is definitely he's definitely going to be a low-owned pivot sort of play, but I would not consider him a non-dominator. That's for sure. He could definitely turn it on at any time. Just not the most optimal play here. Joey Logano, $9,500. Like I said with Keselowski here, fastest in the 2nd practice, and then his speeds fell off along with his teammate in the 3rd practice. Probably trying some new things here, but I like his starting position of 18th. He won last week, but that doesn't matter. I actually don't like that he won last week because, for whatever reason, that will bump up his ownership a little bit here. He's been very low owned all year because it had been a year since he had won a race, and even that race was rescinded. He very legitimately won the race last week, and this is looking like a pretty decent spot for him at least. No real wins or second place finishes here in his track history, but he's done pretty well, pretty consistently. So although this exact race in the spring, he's finished 25th and 22nd in the last 2 years. Maybe a little bit of an issue there, but starting 18th, I like his upside a lot better than some of these guys. Like, he's definitely a guy that I would play in cash games. And if you're looking for FanDuel there, and the laps completed stats, he completes more laps than anybody. 97% of his laps completed. 78% of the time he's finishing on the lead lap, and that's one of the best marks in all of NASCAR. So Logano, I'd call him a cash play. Very safe. Average running position of 7th place this year, and that's second only to Kyle Busch. So Logano, still probably underrated for how good of a play he is. Chase Elliott, $9,300, starting 6th. This is one of his best tracks. And we're about to get to a few of the tracks where Chase is very good at, so this could be Chase season. I'm holding my expectations, but man, his history here is insane. 4 top 5 finishes. No wins, of course, because he is yet to win, but 2/3 and a runner-up in this race last year. Well, not this race last year, but the fall race last year. Average driver rating of 107.6. Average running position under 8. Average finish of 3.3. I mean, it's ridiculous. He's very good here. Quick in practice. Didn't take all that many laps, but he has a fast car. Liking a lot of Chase this week, even starting 6th. Going to be a nice pivot dominator type. And $9,300 is pretty affordable here. He used to be extremely over-owned every week, but this is I mean, lately he's just not been that crazy high owned for someone as popular as he is, and this could definitely be a spot to go in on him, and hopefully can sneak some lead laps. He averages 34.5 lead laps with about 20 fast laps as well to go with that, and that is not bad. Even if he doesn't win or lead a ton of laps, he just needs to come like second again. Jimmie Johnson, $9,000. Now, he's the king of this track. Won it countless times, including this exact race last year. Also won a couple of times in 2014 and 13, 15. The dude's a beast here. 3rd in this race, or 3rd in the last race here. Averages almost 80 lead laps and 49 fast laps per race. Driver rating of 114. I mean, this is his track. This is where Jimmie Johnson stomps around at. And he is starting 19th. Love Jimmie Johnson this week. Just love. And that is the first time I've said that all year long. This is the first part of the season where I will be using tons of Jimmie Johnson. Ryan Blaney, someone who every time I start to get behind this guy, just does me wrong. Looking very fast in practice. 3rd in the 10 lap speeds. And then 2nd only to Harvick in the 15-20 lap speeds. Dude is fast in the long run. If we see these green flag runs go for a while, we've seen him post speeds that are similar to his teammates, Keselowski and Logano. And we've seen him out there dominating with Logano and Keselowski protecting behind him. That can happen at any time. He's never led a lap here, but this year he's leading over 20 laps per race. And definitely someone who could make value even just starting 14th and sneaking up to 5th. So $8,900, don't mind Blaney at all. And underneath him, we've got a couple of really nice Fords from the Stewart Haas group. Both at 30-1 right now. Eric Almirola and Kurt Busch. Let's talk about them together because they are pretty similar plays. Kurt Busch starting 9th. Oh, you know what? Might as well include Clint Boyer in this mix. Let's just go 1, 2, 3 Stewart Haas. Clint Boyer, Eric Almirola, and Kurt Busch starting 12th, 13th, and 9th, respectively. Now, usually I'm not about that like specific area, the 11th through 15th starting spot. Usually that's pretty bad at every track we go to. Here, that is up there with the 16th through 20th, and of course the 1st through 5th in fantasy scoring, and they score a little bit more than the 6th through 10th starting spot, but really it's just about being in the top 20. These guys do very well. It's just all about staying on that lead lap, and all of these guys are fast. Almirola is fastest in final practice, and when it came to 20 lap speeds, he tied exactly with Ryan Blaney, right behind Kevin Harvick. I mean, Almirola is freaking fast, and he has had one hell of a season. That guy, he keeps qualifying way too high at places I want to go in on him at, but I mean, starting 13th, I'm still going to use some Almirola this week. He has a fast car. He's putting himself up there. Not exactly dominating yet, hasn't led a lap all season, but everything about his current form, he's just such a consistent high finisher here. Has a kind of a good track record of success here. He's gotten into trouble several times, but fifth in both of the 2015 races. Didn't race this race last year. This was one of the first races after he hurt his back and was out for a few weeks. But Almirola, you're definitely going to be playing him on FanDuel, where he's very cheap. And really just, he hasn't been terribly high owned. But I wouldn't say go in on him this week, but I would definitely make a pretty heavy stand on him. Then Clint Boyer, he was fastest in 10 and 15 lap speeds. $8,800, starting 12th. Very similar play to Almirola, but his success has been even better this year. More at the shorter tracks, but this is a shorter track here. Bristol, he just dominated at, and that's the only other real short banked track besides Darlington. We haven't hit Darlington yet. Boyer, another very, very strong type play. Really, the only bad finishes he's had here was that 2016 season, right after he got the boot from Michael Waltrip Racing, before he got the Stewart Haas ride, and last race here finished 6th, all over Clint Boyer, even starting 12th. I love this little group here of Stewart Haas. Really, a Stewart Haas stack is looking pretty good right now. And Kurt Busch, starting 9th. I know it's a little bit high, but still, he's led so many laps this year. He's unlike last season and the season before, where he put up almost no Dominator points. He has legitimately led laps. I know it was one of his best tracks last week or a couple weeks ago at Richmond, and he got to lead some laps there. But 28 lead laps on average so far, excluding the plate races. 15 fast laps. I mean, that was not Kurt Busch last year at all, and he's being priced just like Kurt Busch was last year. So not gonna be full fading Kurt Busch like I did all the time. I'm definitely moving on to him some more, but I do prefer Almirola and Boyer a little more. Erica Jones, $8,200. We know how he likes to crash, but he's been okay here. Starting 11th, it just feels like kind of a normal week for him. Getting a little better in the final practice, the 6th fastest time, but he only took 10 laps. Didn't really take much of a long run. Don't really know what to make of him a whole lot, but his odds are better than Boyer, Almirola, and Busch to win. I guess that's just because he's in that JGR ride, but I don't think it's going to happen here. I know he had success at Bristol, but I still don't see it happening here exactly, but I could be wrong. I mean, just have a little bit of exposure, but starting 11th is definitely not near the death sentence it usually is at this track, but I'm not really all that high on Eric Jones unless he gets a starting spot more towards the front, or of course being more towards the back, but he never really does that because he qualifies well. And Ryan Newman, starting 21st, it's pretty decent. It's very slow in practice, all the practices, kind of concerning, honestly. Has good history here, top 20 in his last 7 races, a 4th at this exact race last year in the spring. Average running position of 15th here, starting 21st. I mean, it's all right, but $8,000. Everyone's going to be playing Dillon in this range, starting 6 spots farther back. If you want to just make a specific play where you fade the likes of Jamie McMurray and Austin Dillon in this range, who will be chalk, and play a Ryan Newman and hope that things just shake out that way, there's nothing wrong with it. But optimally, you're going to want to play Dillon and McMurray here, and I'll explain why. Quickly, I'll tell you not to play Ricky Stenhouse Jr. $7,600 because he is starting 5th, and that's just way too high. He's not dominating. Look at the 4 guys he's starting behind. He's going to go backwards and do not much. Austin Dillon, however, not the greatest in practice, but 27th starting position. We've seen it every single time. He always runs in the teens. He's always on the lead lap. He never really does a ton with it, but man, he is always up there. He's very consistent, not falling laps behind. Austin Dillon, a few good finishes here in a row for him. Not leading laps or anything, and just an average running position of 18th, but that's okay for starting 27th. $7,800. Kind of an expensive price for Dillon. He's usually a lower 7K guy, but he's in a really good spot, and that's about as low as I want to go when it comes to place differential plays, because I do not want to start messing with the guys who will start falling laps back here, except for one guy, and we'll get to him. And then Jamie McMurray, $7,400, starting 23rd. That's a pretty good play. Top 10 here, both races last year. He did crash in the fall race of 2016, but a few more top 10 finishes in both of the 2015 races here. Very slow in practice. Maybe concerning a bit, but I mean, his teammates on the pole, I'm sure they can get it figured out. He's at an average running position this year of 16th, 14th at this track, and starting 23rd, you'll think he'll move up a few spots, and I don't really see him losing laps, at least that fast. Maybe he'll run like a lap back, maybe 2 laps, but I could definitely see him moving up and just staying on the lead lap. But it is a little bit risky, because once you get down to this point, even with Dillon, there is the risk of them going 2 laps down. And once you hit 2 laps down, it's really hard to get out from there unless there are these cautions. Alex Bowman, starting 15th. I really like that. I know all his stats for Dover are trash, but I mean, he used to drive just a horrifyingly bad car. So you can throw out all of his old stats for sure. He's been excellent this year. Average finish, 16th. Average running position, 19th, and that's with some accidents in there. I've really been about Bowman. He's just really put himself there towards the end of races. For whatever reason, Chevy does really well at this track. We see guys like historical Hendricks guys do well here. Pretty sure that Dale Jr. had a solid track history at Dover. I have to double check that, guys, and let you guys know about that. But of course, what he did shouldn't relate too much. But we know that all the other Hendricks drivers for sure just crushed Dover. Jimmy especially, Jeff Gordon. You see Chase doing really well. Bowman and Byron, I'll talk about him in a little bit. Love these Chevy guys, and last week I started getting on, even the week before I started getting on these Chevy guys, because I think Byron and Bowman are going to be some really strong plays here in the future. I don't think they've even come close to hitting their ceiling yet. Paul Menard, $6,800. He was fastest in the first practice, but then he kind of came back to reality in the second and third practice once they're out of qualifying trim. His qualifying trim runs really must not have helped him a lot. 20th starting position, which he'd just been over qualifying every single week, so 20th for him is pretty darn good in that Wood Brothers 21 Ford. Was top 10 in the final practice, 10th in both the 10 and 15 lap speeds, but not many people took 15 lap speeds, so it's not actually that great. But he was 6th in the 20 lap speeds, so it's good to see him get a lot of run out there. Seems to be in a better spot than most weeks. Usually it's just an ignore because he qualifies too high, but this week starting 20th, and with it being kind of slim pickings down here, I think that's a great spot for him. He'll stay on the lead lap. Really like Menard as a play this week. And then William Byron starting 17th. I love that so much. I am all over Willie B here. He is one of the best racers of the future, in my opinion. 6th and 10 lap averages, 9th and 15 lap averages. Even if he starts where he finished, or even if he finishes where he starts here, $6,600 is just way too cheap. They are always skimping on Byron, and usually qualifies a little too high, but 17th is perfect for what we're looking for with these top 20. So this is a nice little range here. Just the high 6K range is fantastic. Bowman, Menard, Byron, and I will go back for a second because I did forget about one, Daniel Suarez, and I feel awful because I know it's not Cinco de Mayo anymore, but come on, it's just Cinco de Mayo. Daniel Suarez going back to a track which he has never finished outside of the top 10 at. Debuted 6th here last year, and then 8th in the fall race. Average running position of 10th. Very good track for him. Decent practice times. They're just, okay. I mean, not bad. Pretty bad if you consider his equipment and all that, but still, starting 7th, it just kind of ruins it for him. I wish he would have started in the 20s. Then I would be all over Suarez. But starting 7th, I wouldn't play 0 of him. Despite that, I could still see him sticking around and doing well. Maybe even being in the nuts, but it would take a lot for him. Maybe like a 3rd or 2nd place finish there. I just like Bowman, Menard, and Byron a lot more. And even As we go down cheaper here, AJ Allmendinger at $6,400, starting 28th. That's where, I don't mind him if you want to play him and just hope that something happens here, but I would play him in those chaos lineups. No finish better than 18th here, and again, like I'd said earlier, he's going to be one of those guys a lap down, 2 laps down, perhaps 3 laps down. And once you hit 2 laps down, you're done, and that's it. You're gone. Like, unless a lot of crashes start happening, once you have to start taking waiver rounds instead of pitting, you're just gone. So, not huge on Allmendinger there. Now, Kasey Kahne starting 25th. Much better in practice there. 18th in every single practice. And while he didn't do great in the 15 and 20 lap speeds, he did put his car out there for that amount of time. 9th in the 20 lap speeds. Better than some other drivers at least. Still not sure what to make of Kahne in his 95 Levine Brothers Family Racing Chevy. He's coming in here at 400 to 1 odds, and that's ridiculous for Kasey Kahne. He has the awesome track record here, but that was all with his Hendrick material, but average running position at 12th. This is one of those tracks where being a veteran and just knowing a lot about it helps a lot, so maybe that does go in contrary with his replacements over there and Byron and Bowman, but Kasey Kahne, I think he's a pretty sneaky play starting 25th. It's a little bit, I usually never say this, but that's a little bit low for me. I kind of worry about him going a lap or 2 down, but I think I could definitely see him moving into the top 15, staying on the lead lap, or being in that lucky dog spot. $6,200 is way too cheap for Kasey Kahne, so I'm going to be making my bed with him again. Yet again, I'm playing a lot of Kasey Kahne lately, and who knows, maybe that will maybe that'll help me out this week, as he's been pretty low owned in general. Moving on, Trevor Bayne here, $6,000 on both sides, so very cheap on FanDuel. Starting 22nd, not really all that interested by it. Only one good finish here, 10th in the 2016 spring race. But other than that, it's been all bottom 20 finishes for him. Can't really get too excited about that when Kasey Kahne is right there. And even Ty Dillon, $5,900. He's starting in the 30th position. And I kind of almost like Ty Dillon, not because he won't. It's not like he's going to move up like a ton. I know he's had a little success here. But starting 30th, I could easily see him being 2-3 laps down. It's just that the guys starting behind him are all worse than him, I think. Like the guys who qualified in the 30s, they are all really bad, and they're all going to stay way back there. So I think that Ty Dillon has at least a safe floor, and maybe he might even be a cash game, but he was 31st in every single practice, 29th in 10 lap speeds. I know he has some decent history here. In this race last year, he finished 14th. In Tony Stewart's car, he finished 32nd. I do believe there was an incident or something that happened there, but, I don't know. I think Ty Dillon will be a little bit popular, and perhaps that would be, you could fade him. It's just I don't see guys like LaJoy and maybe Chastain, but like Cody Ware, Reed Sorensen, Greg Gaulding, Derek Cope, they're not passing. They're just not going to be passing Ty Dillon, and if he just stays where he's at and moves up a little bit, why not? He averages 9 lead laps here. I'm pretty sure that has to do with some pit strategy here, but you can see that towards the end, and his crew chief's got a good head on his shoulders. He got the RCR hookup. I'm still kind of wavering back and forth with Ty Dillon, but if you want to play him, even with the slow practice speeds and the 750 to 1 odds, I don't mind it much. I'm probably not going to go that way. Bubba Wallace, starting 26, $5,800. Very, very cheap. I see him being popular this week. Practice time's a little bit better than Ty Dillon. Still not really like his kind of track, I'd say, and he's never raced here. And that really makes the case for fading him. With this being such a hard track, but he had some pretty decent success in Xfinity, and he's really just been so impressive over the last few weeks. I'm probably not fading him. I could see him sticking around the lead lap. He's right there with Kahne. I know that historically those guys don't do all that well, but I'm not going to not have any Darrell Wallace Jr. I will probably either try to match the field or try and go slightly above it. I mean, the 150 to 1 odds are just way better than Ty Dillon's 750 to 1 odds. You know, and I think I'd reckon that more people take Ty Dillon than Darrell Wallace Jr. just because, I don't know, Bubba's probably still be higher owned, but, you know, I just find myself checking off a lot of these guys down low, and you really do have to play some of these cheap guys, and that's where the price of Kahne and Bubba Wallace and Ty Dillon, they really help you fill out these lineups when you're going to want to slam in these quintuple digit guys up top. Now, Chris Buescher is starting 16th. He's $5,600, but you just don't play him starting 16th. He's way too vulnerable to be going down laps here, and he's not going to move up into the top 15. He's just not going to do that. Michael McDowell starting 29th. That's a pretty decent play. It's another one of the few plays I'd make from down here. Practice times were just not there, and sitting at 1,000 to 1 odds, he's very much a 2 or 3 lap down threat, so just consider that, but I would definitely not mark him off. A couple of top 20 finishes in his last 3 starts, and really at any track he can kind of strike in that 34 Ford. Landcastle's old ride. He could definitely be a play that's, I wouldn't say low owned, because I do think people are going to flock to him perhaps a little bit, but more so to a guy $200 cheaper than I'm going to talk about here. But yeah, I guess as a good pivot off of Ragan, you could play McDowell, but remember, there is just the threat that he goes down some laps here. If that happens, I'm sorry, but you just have to make that play knowing that could happen. Now, David Ragan, starting 32nd. I know that's way low in the 30s. Historically, the guys starting in the 30s get smashed, but he's really good at these steeper tracks. 21st here last year, and in the spring race in 2016, finished 17th. Spring race 2015, 13th. And the last few weeks, we've seen his speeds increase mightily. He's been very, very good. His practice time is just so much better than everyone else in this range. Why he is still $5,300, I do not know. He's just going to be an immensely important play this week. He's sitting at 150 to 1. Those odds are similar to Darrell Wallace Jr., better than guys like Menard and Byron. So, you know that Ragan his car has been cooking with some sauce for a little while. $5,300. He opens up so much salary for you, and I really think he can stay on the lead lap, and push himself into that lucky dog spot. I think he's definitely one of the guys that you think will be the lucky dog come, say, a competition caution or stage end. And really, the plays underneath Ragan, you're just not going to want to make these plays. I'm going to just run through them real quick, but I promise you're not going to want to play any of these dudes. So you've got Matt DiBenedetto starting 24th. That's just way too high. Landon Castle starting 33rd. You could make that argument, but his car is nowhere near as good as what is now Michael McDowell's car, the number 34. Just the 00 Chevy, it's just no good. That's Jeffrey Earnhardt's car. I know that he is good at some tracks where, the flatter tracks, short tracks where his driving capabilities come out, but here, if you just have a slow car, you get stomped. Same goes for Corey LaJoie, Ross Chastain, Sorensen, Ware, Galding, Cope. They're all just going to get stomped. I know that Chastain debuted here last year at the spring race and finished 20th and crashed in 2017. So starting 31st, since it's basically the same reason you would play Ty Dillon. It's just that the 7 guys starting behind him are all trash. He's at least going to finish like 31st, you'd figure. Not sure about moving up, as he's going to be like 3-4 laps down. But if you're punting anyone, it's got to be Chastain of the 5,000 and under group, because you're not going to want to play Sorensen, Ware, Galding, Cope. You're just not going to. And even LaJoie starting in last place, I bet some people will play him. He finished 34th in his debut last year at this track. Just horrible practice times, just terrible stats and what we've seen from him so far in the season. I just can't get behind it. the numbers say just don't play the bottom guys. Just stick to Ragan, stick to Kasey Kahne, Ty Dillon, Bubba Wallace, Michael McDowell. You don't really need to go much farther than that. And if you do, it has to be Ross Chastain. It just kind of has to be. So quick look at FanDuel. And the way the FanDuel goes, since total laps are considered, it's just very, very important that your guy does not crash early. Crashing early will just kill you, no matter who it is. And, if someone's going to be 50+% owned chalk on FanDuel, you just fade them. There's no option. Because the scoring ranges are just so similar. We have so many people projected in the 70s and 80s on FanDuel, and compare that to DraftKings, it's a night and day difference. There's just such a smaller range of outcomes if you finish the race. If you don't finish the race, you get barely any points, and it's even worse than scoring negatives on DraftKings. It really is. If you have an early crash, you are just donezo, and you don't know who's going to have that early crash unless it's like Xfinity and they're starting parking or whatever. But since you don't know, it just makes so much sense to just play contrarian and hope that something happens early to some of the chalkier guys. And now we know last week was a plate race, and FanDuel released their product, started with a plate race, so the strategy has to change. You're not going to be needing to leave as much salary on the table. But when you're looking at the projections, when Eric Almirola at 9,400 is projected 74, and you've got Jimmy Johnson at 12,300 projected 77, it's going to be hard to justify paying up for these guys, but at the same time, you're also going to be able to afford to pay up for these guys. Definitely avoid the bottom of the field here in FanDuel. You don't even want to mess with a Ty Dillon type. No one's safe even if they're starting in last. Because the safety would just come in finishing laps. You can look at the laps completed stats, percentage of laps completed historically, percentage of the times they finished within 5 laps. Those numbers are nice, and you see guys like Kevin Harvick are indeed really, really safe and generally finish their races and don't crash. But at the same time, shit could happen to anybody. It really can. In FanDuel, I'd try to play it more off of the ownership, predict who's going to be chalky, and then leave some salary. Seriously, you can definitely leave some salary on FanDuel. I think unless they start messing with some of these prices, or maybe just going to a different track type, strategy might be different, but it's looking like you're going to be able to leave tons of salary on the table no matter what, just because the range of outcomes in their fantasy scoring system just isn't all that much. There aren't the fast laps and the lead laps that just overwhelm, and the total laps completely equalize the field unless you crash. So yeah, that'll do it for me here. Still, we do not have the Domination Station lineup optimizer up for FanDuel yet. We are looking at next week. We're trying really hard, but we've got everything up for DraftKings like usual. Let's get ready to dominate that, guys. Sorry I couldn't have this up here earlier. I was traveling, but man, I am ready to go. We got the race tomorrow, or I guess today now, at 2 o'clock, and I will see you guys there at Dover. Let's tackle this monster mile and win some money. See you guys later.
Thank you for listening to the DFS Army podcast. Join the DFS Army today and gain access to our private Slack chat, where you can chat with real DFS pros and coaches, as well as other DFS Army members with winning track records. Also included in your membership is access to our premium articles, DFS Army weighted projections for every sport we offer, from NFL to MMA, weekly player picks and cheat sheets, the strategy vault of timeless concepts, and the DFS Army Domination Station, a truly state-of-the-art lineup optimizer, offering your personal projections or ours. The DFS Army membership is the best value across the industry. Join today and get 2 free ebooks, as well as the secrets to unlocking a new level to your game.